They came back and partied at Martling's Tavern.
But I love stories of old New York.
Excuse me. Can I quit this podcast?
I told Eddie Murphy to stay in college so he'd have something to fall back on. I did great advice. Jackie, how about the lighter side of history? The lighter side.
I'm done laughing at my joke.
Okay. I know a lot of things and I share them on the podcast and you don't care.
What are we talking about?
I can't get a word in edgewise on this show. I mean, it's...
Here's how we sell it.
Okay. The wonderful comedian Robert Klein, an inspiration to me, without a doubt, used to say when he was growing up, they had these nuclear bomb drills, these fallout drills, and they would turn on all the sirens and everybody would take cover at school and at work. And then he said, and they'd also turn the siren on at noon, and he said, I think the Russians are going to figure out we should bomb them at noon.
I remember that. I actually
12 o'clock, they'll think it's lunchtime.
Which is brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah, we literally went out in the hall and put our heads between our legs. Like,
Yes.
literally. Like,
yes,
it sounds
and
like
of
a
course,
joke, you
that's
know?
not going to do anything in a nuclear attack. But
Absurd.
again, young people never had that. They had fire drills, but we had to sit in the hall, put our heads. All you're going to do when you put your head down there is kiss your ass goodbye.
Bro, I was just going to say that
because
was
it's not going to protect you in a nuclear attack.
But it gives you some sort of reassurance that maybe you're doing the right thing.
Right.
You know, like you're doing something which you're not. You
And
know?
they had a song, Duck and
Yeah,
Cover.
as
Duck
opposed
and
to
Cover.
sit there and die. you
Yeah,
know.
Duck and Cover was a song that they played for us, and a turtle sang it. And a nuclear bomb is, you can't duck and cover out of the way of a nuclear bomb, but it was a way of dealing with a new reality.
The concept, right.
And I'll tell you something. There is no coincidence that after actually the Russians got the nuclear bomb in 1949, Americans are afraid, they're looking up at the sky more, and the number of reported UFOs goes up and up and up and up and up. And that's not a coincidence. More Americans are looking at the sky, they're thinking about the sky, strange things in the sky, and there is
It's not that there's more things in the sky, just the more people are looking.
More people are looking, and more people are worried. There are UFO sightings in the past, even centuries ago, but they were described differently. And people in the 50s are just looking. That's why there's so many movies. And radiation, they didn't even know about radiation until the early 50s. And as soon as we know about something and it's exciting, all of these monster movies come out. How do you explain Godzilla? Radiation. Oh, okay.
Right. It's a catch-all.
Just like when electricity came in, how do you explain Frankenstein? Electricity. You know, every generation has their... How do you explain the Matrix? Computers. Oh, okay. Every generation has their new thing that they get into and mystify it.
It's...
I love it. I love it. But when you talk about old New York and history, you got me. You got me. And Old Martling's Tavern was where they started to form alliances and what's in it for me? And it's a great part of history.
You know, anything you read about Martling's Tavern, they never fail to expound on how drunk everybody was and how crazy the place was. You know, they were trying to get things done, but you know, they were what did they call them?
Drunks.
It
They call them.
it was like the dirty place or something like that.
Well, I got to tell you, America is a hard drinking country, but today, nothing like the past. Nobody at Martling's Tavern had a spritzer. Okay, spritzer. They didn't.
No, they were just like
Nobody had a Zima. It was hard whiskey.
hard whiskey
And
tons of it.
And men, especially women, there were no women in Martling's Tavern. Would have been unthinkable. And the temperance movement, which you begin to see in the 1830s, was driven by women who were seeing their husbands and their fathers and their brothers really suffering from the effects of alcohol.
Being drunk,
Yep.
wrecking the family, blah, 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 blah. And Prohibition came about after women got the vote. Because the minute the women got the vote, all right, we got the vote, we're closing down the booze because we nice to see our husbands once in a while.
Ah, yes. And the men came back from World War I and said, "What? You did what?
You did what?
What a failure Prohibition was, an exercise in national hypocrisy. But times were so different. Now, imagine this. Say you're a beautiful woman at a White House reception, and I'm a man talking to you. So I think that we're going to be discussing this with President Jackson, and I think we're going to move forward with the Indian removal policy. And I think that's going to be a successful, and the woman would think nothing of that. That would be nothing. That was normal. In the White House, they had spittoons all over the room, certainly each corner, and around the spittoon were brown spots because the guys didn't care if they hit. They missed all the time. I mean, I think a woman today on a first date, if the guy was chewing tobacco, I don't think there would be even a finished first date, let alone a second.
Even if a guy clears his throat.
I mean, it was a different, just chewing tobacco. Every president had a big,
you know, we all, I'm sure you did, you were probably the guy, we all had friends in college who had the odd facts and the things that, there were always weird things. I remember in the beginning when people were really digging into pot in the mid-'60s, people always say, when did you start smoking pot? But back then it was, where were you in 1967?
Yeah.
I didn't smoke pot till I was a sophomore in college because, you're drinking beer and you're having fun, who needs it? But my friend Russ Nyland would always have these crazy facts, and I distinctly remember him saying there were no bathrooms in the Palace of Versailles, and the guys would just walk behind the velvet curtains and squat down and go to the bathroom
I love it. I love it. This is
and
how
I'm like, shut up, Russ, you're so out of your mind. And it turns out that he's pretty much on the money, which is crazy.
Well, I got to tell you, Jackie, you ask people, how did the King of England in 1800 go to the bathroom? How did a super rich person in New York City in 1800 go to the bathroom? And people say, well, they went to... Actually, wealthy people had something called a chamber pot. And of course it had an airtight lid, and it went under your bed. And if you had to do number one and number two, you used your chamber pot. And if you were rich or even middle class and could afford a servant, you didn't have to think twice about it because it was the servant's job to empty it. Now, if you were poor, and really poor people, especially down south that lived in a shack with no floor, they couldn't afford a chamber pot, Jackie. They had to go out into the woods and have the chipmunks laugh at them. Right. All right? So they were so poor they lived in a shack with no floor, dirt poor, and without a pot to piss in. That's where that expression comes from. You are dirt poor without a pot to piss in. And literally, back in those days, they were, because they didn't even have a pot to piss in, and they didn't have a floor.
Red Fox used to say the difference between a rich girl and a poor girl is a rich girl has a canopy over her bed and a poor girl has a canopy under her bed.
I love it.
Which is great.
I love it. And you know what became a fad back then? Rich people would have their enemies' face painted on the bottom of the chamber pot so they could go on their enemy's face. I mean, you have money.
Sometimes during a political campaign, you'll see somebody's picture and on a piece of plastic that they put in the urinal, which is the same idea.
I love it. I just love it.
Now, when my parents' house was built in 1900 or 1910, there was no bathroom. There was no plumbing in East Norwich till there was no electricity till say 1918, whatever.
And they finally fixed that in 2004, right?
So there's a picture of my parents' house from 1910, and in the back you can kind of see a little white building, and at whatever point my father built a little shed to put stuff in and for the kids to play in. And I'm like, you know what? He built where the outhouse was. He recreated the outhouse from his childhood. Of course, you never get to ask him or never think about it because you don't make the connection that if there wasn't a bathroom, of course they had an outhouse, But then you just deal with
Yeah,
that.
an outhouse. That's what you needed. And of course, you and I both remember our parents, and certainly our grandparents, using the term icebox. Nobody says, if somebody says
I still
icebox.
use it, and so does my cousin Lenny,
Okay.
because my father never stopped saying it. To me, and people always yell at me for being melodramatic, my ex-wife, my girlfriend, to me, the word refrigerator is still a new term. Not because I didn't always have a refrigerator, but my father referred to it, it's in the icebox. It's in the icebox. It's in the icebox. And when me or Lenny say it, people like, you know.
Yeah, people really look at you sideways when you use the term icebox.
Which is it's just so fun, you know.
But back in those days, people didn't go shopping for a week. You had to go virtually every day. There's no supermarket. You had to go to one place for the meat, another place for the vegetables, another place for the fruit.
A
another
new
place for the veg-
expression in my family was barbecue.
Barbecue.
And my father would say, "You want to have a cookout?" And you'd get some sticks and make a fire, because you know then all of a sudden they had this thing called charcoal. I remember when I was a little kid, my mother had one of those things, and you put the meat in, and then all of a sudden they're selling these little packages with hamburger meat that's already ground up. And I remember that transition, which is when, 1951, 52
Yeah,
or something
boy,
like that. Which
I
sounds
gotta
like,
tell
you
you.
know, when I was a kid, my hair was cut by the same barber for like, I think my first ponytail was cut off by the same barbers. When I was a kid in East Norwich, the barber shop right on Northern Boulevard on 25A, in the back of the barber shop was the mailboxes.
Ah,
The actual, you know, it
Wow.
was like all of a sudden, hey, did you hear we're getting a post office? You know, it was a big deal, you know.
everybody goes through this. When your parents pass, you go through their old stuff, their papers that are in the bottom of a closet. And my brother and I went through my dad's papers, and Jackie, we found Confederate war bonds. And my father came to New York when he was 12 and had Kentucky roots. And
This guy passed it to his son, and
yeah,
this
and
guy
passed it on,
to
and
his son.
they held on to these Confederate war bonds. And for a while, I thought when Trump was president that these bonds would come back and have some value. But that didn't work out.
There was a bunch of papers in a box, like under my father's bed, and who knows what's in there. And after he passed away, there was a couple of letters to my grandmother from Ethel Roosevelt Derby,
Uh-huh.
a letter to my grandmother from Edith Roosevelt. There was the contract to my great-grandfather and his brother to put up the first telephone poles between Oyster Bay
Oh.
and East Norwich, which was written out on yellow legal pad, and then I typed it out, and there were a couple of hustlers, you know, trying to make a living, and I also have a contract that's literally called a pickle contract. And pickles, it turns out, were a fallback crop, because cucumbers grew no matter what, so if everything else failed, and this thing says how much they're worth, and you're gonna be X amount of pickles per barrel, and they randomly test them to see if they have nubs. I mean, you read this, and it's like a Mad Magazine article, but it's the truth, you know. Oh, and one of the things in there is the deed to Vincent Martling's farm. He was the first guy that came from Staten Island to East Norwich, and his farm is where they wound up building King Zog's, which was the mansion there by the King of Albania, who never lived there. And it's now that whole Mutton Town Preserve in East Norwich was my great-great-grandfather's farm. And I have the deed, the old yellow, I mean, it should be someplace special. And it's in a pile of stuff. It's a miracle. God knows how much stuff got tossed. You know what I mean?
I said to my father and my mother, I said, how come all our relatives were ministers and teachers? Didn't anybody want to make any money? Couldn't somebody have been a robber baron?
I say, listen, Vincent Martling was in East Norwich in 1850. Couldn't we have saved a little land or put away a few dollars, you know? Like Rothman's on the corner of 25A and 106 has been that 4 generations of my family left their paychecks at Brockman's getting drunk, you know, literally, you know.
So my grandfather was a part owner of a soda company called Parfait. Back in the late, you know, like around the turn of the century, 1900. Parfait, P-A-R-F-A-Y. You can Google it. And the competition was Pepsi and Coca-Cola. And somehow Parfait managed to fail utterly. And Coke
the
and
other two
Pepsi
did okay.
The other two did okay. And it was family lore that my grandfather, I don't know how this is possible, found the secret formula for Coca-Cola in a public library. Now, I'm doubtful about that because they guard that like crazy. But this company did start and did compete, and my grandfather had no business sense. They were competing against Coke, and it was in all the papers. A mouse at the bottling plant got into a Coke bottle. A woman drank it, saw the mouse, passed out, hit her head, was really injured, sued Coca-Cola. It's on the front pages of all the newspapers. And my grandfather said, "This is our next ad. Here it is. You will never find a mouse in a Parfait bottle." Well, needless to say
That's just...
I mean, he tried. My grandfather tried things, and they failed, and they failed. My father remembers being a little kid, and they're out testing in the fog a lamp that shines through fog. I invented a lamp that shines through fog. And my father says, I remember my grandfather going, wait, I can't see anything. It didn't work.
Jesus.
It didn't work. But at least he was like
At least he's out there
Ralph Cramden, trying to get rich quick.
My father's father was a blacksmith. His father was a blacksmith. And his father, you know, blacksmith. It's not, nobody was really branching out. You know, how about we own horse races too or something, you know.
You know, and I'll give you one more of my grandfather's failures. He gets a great idea, and he goes to the board of directors of a big insurance company in early 1920s in, of course, Hartford, the capital of insurance. And he pitches this new idea to the board of directors. Let's get these little booths in airports where flyers can buy insurance for individual flights. And you're crazy, get out of here. They laughed him out of the room, and then 8 months later, they did it. And that's because when you go pitch an idea, you better have a copyright or a patent. Otherwise,
it's the classic thing. Hey, boss, how about this?
And then they do it.
Stupid idea.
And then they do it.
You know what happened? That happened to me. Do you know how that happened to me?
No.
We were going to Channel 9, and we do a show 5 days a week on the radio, but then we go to Secaucus and put together a TV show, and we had to have an hour show recorded in the can by Friday night. And it was, I can't tell you, I was doing stand-up too,
Wow,
and so,
okay.
you know, so we're killing ourselves, and at the end of the season, even though we were making money, everybody was like not really that excited to get renewed because it was so much work. And I said, why are we going to Secaucus? We got all the show we need right here. Howard, you're there, she's over there, Fred's there, I'm here, Gary's in and out, John's in and out, we got guests. We got more than enough television show right in this room. They made fun of me, you're an idiot, and it was all about Jackie doesn't want to do the work of going to Secaucus. It was always Jackie's lazy, and I'm sure they made fun of me on the air, and you cannot find those tapes. A month later, 2 months later, we used to get in the limo to go to a screening, because Howard couldn't walk on the street. So even if we were going to HBO 2 blocks away, we jam into the limo. So we're sitting in the limo, and this was one of those moments. He said, hey, tomorrow we got a bunch of cameras coming in. We're going to videotape, do a test. And he looked me right in the eye as he said to everybody, you know how I've always wanted to videotape the radio show. And I was like, and I said nothing.
All right, I'm laughing, but that's pretty serious stuff.
I mean, if
that
had been,
All
because then after he did it, I missed the thing.
Yeah,
Put cameras
everybody
on
did
the
it. Yeah.
radio, which is not inventing the wheel. It was a no-brainer. I didn't think of it as anything. But
Yeah.
the next, all of a sudden, it was like genius Howard Stern comes up with the concept to put the radio on television, which is, you know, even just a little, you know. But that's, you know, that's the way, like you said, you know, let me turn on my iPhone. Hey, I've got an idea. You know what I mean?
Right,
So,
right. If you don't have money, use the poor man's copy, right? Just send yourself certified mail with your idea inside.
that's what they used to say when I was trying to be a songwriter. Like,
Well,
if you can't afford $25 to copyright, send yourself
it will hold up in court. Just don't open it, you know, when it comes to you. Don't open it.
Well, I had to open it because I was drunk and I forgot the song, you know. Listen, I hate to spoil a good time, but I have no concept. I enjoy you so much, and the sound of my own voice, so I can't leave that out.
Jackie, this has been fun.
As my friend Red McCready used to say, as the club sinks slowly into the red. See you next time.
Hey, a new episode of Stand Up Memories every Wednesday.
How exciting is that?
Starring me, Peter Bales, and right here, Jackie the Joke Man Martling.
Please follow us on social media. Search it out. What is it? Me Space?
MySpace,
Your Space?
TikTok, Instagram, Facebook.
Doodah, doodah.